Welcome. This is Mayor Deirdre Waterman, and you're here for the Pontiac, Michigan virtual town hall about the Phoenix Center. We're going to answer your questions about the status of the Phoenix Center and where we are in the terms of the settlement agreement that was signed by the City Council in November 2018. May 1st is also significant, and it's the day that I, as mayor, turn in the balanced budget for the next fiscal year to the City Council. We've been pleased and fortunate over the past few years that Pontiac has come from a deficit situation to a sound financial footing with a surplus budget. That can be made and sustained if we make sound financial decisions. And certainly this matter of the Phoenix Center is one of the ones that can help to shape whether we can maintain a sound financial footing or have an adverse effect. In addition, May 1st was the day announced by the interim city clerk, who controls the medical marijuana application process, as the day he would start review of the medical marijuana application. Over the number of months which we have prepared for this, there have been a number of budget sessions in which the budget has been prepared and other preparations have been made for the interim clerk to start this review. So we will continue this process, and we'll also have a town hall about the medical marijuana process on May 5th, which is Thursday at 10 a.m. So we will send out the instructions for how you can join us for a Zoom conference there as well. I also wanted to show you the document that many of you have seen that was prepared as a compilation of many of the questions people have been asking us about the Phoenix Center. As some of you may have seen, and some people have asked, why are we presenting this now? We're presenting it now for several reasons. Number one, as I told you, the settlement agreement that we had signed on through the mediator with the court that was agreed to by Ottawa Towers, the plaintiff in this case, says that the city had 2 years to fulfill the terms of the settlement agreement or to risk default. We are now 18 months into that procedure, and so we have 6 months left. So we wanted to let you know where we're in that process. We've had some delays and obstacles on getting that process. We're happy now. We're at least to the point where we can announce the architectural and engineering report, but there's still steps to be done. So time is running out, and because of that, we thought it was important and imperative that we let the public know and advise you of where that is and what needs to be done and who should be the next step. So that is why we've sent this out with the clock saying time is running out, and that's why it was important to do this now. Now we know many of you are confronted with this coronavirus crisis, and that is of preeminent importance right now. We understand that. Health and safety is the first interest of this administration, and to that end, we have certainly got a lot of information, have co-opted with other institutions to get food distribution. For example, the senior program that we have for the seniors and the homebound and the disabled of the community, we are now totaling 17,000 meals that have been delivered for that program. We thank all the others who have stepped up too to make sure that food distribution is done in this community and that there is no food insecurity for anybody who's affected by coronavirus. I'm also happy to say that the administration has been able to move forward with doing the essential services of the city. And we've had a number of these Zoom conferences, as many of us have had to work remotely by the governor's order. And I must thank my staff for making an excellent transition and continuing to carry out the city business. And in fact, there's so many Zoom conferences that I just want to give a caveat. If anybody's here for the Zoom related to the specials at the Dandy D's today, you're in the wrong Zoom conference, all right? So make sure you're here for the Phoenix Center Conference, and that's where we are today. As I was mentioning the other things for May 1st, May 1st is also the day in which we can celebrate those small businesses who are supported in this community. And yesterday, we had 22 Pontiac businesses that received grant awards through the Oakland County Coronavirus Relief Program. And we congratulate those businesses. And I know there's going to be another tranche of awards for those who are not awarded that, but we will proceed with that. And thank you to the people who are on that District 4 committee to make the selection and they will continue that process as the next tranche is announced. So with that, I'm going to tell you what the program is for today. The next voice you hear will be Vince DeLeonardis of ALC. As you know, it's a long-standing business here in the city of Pontiac, and ALC has been the owner's rep in which they have organized these steps that we're going through in this timeline that he will tell you about. Following that, we will have the presentation and the unveiling, as it were, of the IDS Architectural and Engineering Report on the survey. This will be presented again at City Council meeting, but we want it to be open to the larger public. Following that, we will read some of the public comments that many of you have made as you have considered this issue, and we have brought it to light in the importance to this city. After that, we will have our city attorney, Matt Gibb, talk about the next steps and what the steps are to be able to complete the terms of the settlement agreement and where the city is liable if we risk not doing that. We will have time for some question and answers, and then we will have some announcements at the end. Vince, welcome.
Well, good afternoon, Mayor. Thank you for inviting me to present. I'd also like to say good afternoon to council members that are tuning in, as well as interested community members and the Phoenix Center team. What we have is a presentation to talk about our current status of the project. We're now at schematic design and prepared for estimate review. So I presented to the city probably over 12 times with the idea of communicating of what the plans were for the project, acting as the owner's representative, and again, as our construction. So on our next slide, we'll give an overview of what we look to present today. Number one is a flow chart. There's been discussion about what the various roles, what are the timeframes for whether it's a cost opinion or an estimate. Our flow chart will show the process that we envision for this Phoenix Center project. Our project milestone schedule, showing where we're at and what our plans are. The schematic plan will be presented by Dave DeSuccio of IDS, and he'll talk about what their scope was and where they're at in the design phases. Jerry McClellan of Our Construction will present the schematic cost estimate and then talk about what the commitment of funds are required to meet the goals of the project. And then Matt Gibb will talk about our next steps, and then there will be opportunities for questions and answers. For us in our involvement for projects, we understand good communication is the best approach to achieve the goals of our client. And that those goals are achieved by following our process flow chart. Okay, the first steps that we're taking on the Phoenix Center journey was those assessments that were performed of the existing facility, with the understanding that over 10 years of lack of maintenance, deferred maintenance, had occurred and it affected the project. This facility assessment was performed by several engineering firms to determine what needs to be done, if possible, to bring the Phoenix Center back. This assessment could have well determined that perhaps the building was not subject to a renovation or repairs, but in fact it was. So the power of that study was to determine the feasibility that the Phoenix Center could be returned to its original service, its intent, and an order of magnitude cost opinion could be developed. This is not an estimate, it's only an order of magnitude cost opinion, which is very important for when the city solicited proposals for program manager, owner's representative, and as well as eventually, say, the architect and engineers. It gave them an idea of what was the order of magnitude of this project to help make sure we receive good proposals. So after that study and then the negotiations with the mayor's office and then the approval of the city, including city council, it was determined to select an owner's representative. That owner's representative is going to make sure that the needs of that building will achieve what the goals are and what the commitments are. It will also establish the necessary processes for acting as the owner's advocate to make sure that the goals are identified, that they are communicated to the other team members, and that we meet the needs for quality, to make sure that the settlement agreement requirements are met. What are the desires and goals for the city? Those are the items around quality. Cost, obviously, how much is it going to cost to do that work, and evaluate options, and then schedule to meet the commitments that have been laid out as part of the settlement agreement, and then what is the desire of the city in regards to that schedule. Identify all those goals, and then act as the owner's advocate to make sure that they're being met. The next step was to select an architect engineering firm. Now, whereas those initial assessments were performed by architect engineers, they were done to a very, high level. Now we're hiring the design professionals, the city is, that will actually tour the deck, they'll study what its needs are, they'll study the original drawings, and then develop very detailed plans for the work that is needed to be performed. In those initial phases, those plans allow an actual cost estimate to be developed by professional estimators. They are not contractors, they are, ALC employees, or for the mechanical electrical, our consultants that develop an actual detailed cost estimate based on quantities and pricing. Now, as a firm, we provide pre-construction services, cost estimating, and we're well known for our abilities to do this. And that way, decisions could be made of what scope is in the project, what is required, what is critical, and those items that are in the job or perhaps can be modified. This cost information is very, very powerful and is an important part of this phase. So IDS is developing these designs in 3 phases. The schematic, and that's where we're at right now, the design development, and then preparation of the construction documents. Now, it's very important to note, IDS was very responsive to the request for proposals to meet this process flowchart. Not all firms were, but we're also seeing the power of IDS's proposal in that we established milestone dates when they were first brought on in March, and we've been hitting every one of those dates since. So we really appreciate the faith that city council put in the team to be able to make this process move forward. The next phase is for us as your construction manager for the city to facilitate good communication between the owner, the city of Pontiac, and the design professionals to make sure that we're maintaining schedules, timelines, preparing these detailed cost estimates at each phase of the design so that decisions can be made in a timely manner and keep the project on track. So that's why you've seen, myself and other ALC team members, and recently the IDS team members, regularly at council meetings so that we can communicate transparently with the program. Now, the next to last phase, and we'll be entering that soon, is we will be preparing individual trade packages for the bidding of the work. Our cost estimate doesn't represent a bid. What it represents is a professional estimate so decisions can be made. That next step of preparing bid packages, soliciting the trade bids by the specialty contractors is what happens next. Our people will be in contact with the marketplace. We'll be advertising so that we can solicit those bids, get good bid coverage, thoroughly analyze those bids, prepare recommendations to the owner for approval prior to the award of those trade contract packages. And as we get ready for construction, as a construction manager, we will oversee the project in regards to safety, making sure work is being performed safely in regards to the workers and the public. It's a very big responsibility. We have Orchard Lake Road underneath that building. There will be people parking in that building. It will be occupied, but that's where a lot of our experience as a construction manager of working in occupied spaces will take place. Also, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have experienced, say, over the last 6 to 8 weeks of running over 12 major projects in the protocols that are required to keep workers safe. And that will be all part of the packages are developed to ensure the safety of those tradespeople working on the project. We'll also coordinate the activities of the architect engineer, answering questions so that the work can move move along very precisely without being slowed, and then taking care of that administration. Your architect engineer works for the city. They are that independent eyes and ears as we work as a team. And together, the reporting on the budget, on schedule, and on quality will happen regularly, and we will ensure that the project is delivered on time and on budget. These aren't just selling words, this is what we do. And we'll be held accountable, as we will be prepared to present at council meetings on a regular basis. The one thing to take a look at is our milestone schedule. And that is, showing, the planning that was done, say, going back to May of 2018 when we were brought, or 2019, when ALC was hired and brought on board, that we were able to look forward and envision the various steps of the project. And we also are familiar with the settlement agreement. We sensed the urgency, back in May to be able to go out for proposals for the AE, get them on board, complete the design, the estimates, allow city to make decisions in a timely manner to keep the project moving forward to achieve the requirements of the settlement agreement. We have not been able to maintain that timeline because of lack of approvals. Those are things that we've discussed regularly. For us, we're going to take the information we have and represent the client to the absolute best of our ability in communicating, when the project is impacted, and then working together to deliver the best project, for the city and for its citizens, and to meet its obligations. That's been our commitment day one. You see our perseverance. We're here to serve. And we look forward, as this project, we're starting to see progress, and that we can meet the obligations of the city as they work with the stakeholders in this process. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave DeSuccio. We'll let you know what they're seeing in the design, where they're in the process, the major activities that they see, and the disciplines that are involved that will lead the next steps to creating, say, the estimate, or the estimates, and then ultimately the bidding of the work. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Vince, and good afternoon, Mayor and City Council, and all the interested parties who took some time out this sunny afternoon to listen in and get up to speed. As Vince indicated, we have completed the schematic design portion of this project. What we've been doing over the last several weeks, actually month, I guess, is to walk through the facility again, get some fresh eyes on it. It's been over 2 years since we were in the facility last, and we did identify some additional vandalism that's taken place, and 2 years worth of degradation to the facility beyond what we saw last time. But at this point, we've further refined the repairs required, and have broken it down into 7 major categories of repair, starting with the structural work. What you're seeing in the background is a sample of the schematic documents that was repaired. I believe this is a 3rd level, and it's identifying all the structural work that needs to take place. Due to lack of maintenance over the past 10 plus years, we've seen several failures in the reinforcing cables, like they're called tendons, throughout the facility. We see concrete that is spalling and breaking apart, steel failure, etc., and some failing in the waterproofing, the surface waterproofing of the facility that needs to be repaired. So we've categorized all the structural work in that category. Architectural repairs include the poor condition of the roll-up doors and man doors throughout the facility. They're rusting through and need to be replaced. There's a lot of painting that needs to take place in the building, and that includes a lot of surface prep because of the really poor condition of the steel underneath, and a lot of new curb work associated with the entries and exits from the facility. We've also categorized the elevators. None of the elevators are operational right now, and a lot of the parts have been scavenged and damaged. So that scope of work is to bring all 5 elevators back up to working order. The plumbing and HVAC in the building has been pretty well scavenged. So a lot of that needs to be replaced or repaired. We've got a detailed scope of work identifying that portion of it. We also took a hard look at the fire protection, which the facility's current fire protection system is non-operational. The portion that is sprinkled is actually served from one of the towers that needs to be disconnected. So this project will bring a new fire protection system, or reactivate the existing, replace the fire pump, and get the sprinkler system working on the amphitheater operational again. The electrical work involves bringing new power to the facility. This is, over the years, the facility has been vandalized, and pretty much all the copper has been ripped out of this building, including the main transformers and main Detroit Edison switchgear. So we need to replace all that equipment. The majority of lighting in the facility has been removed and scavenged. So the project includes all new lighting, and the tunnel lighting through where Orchard Lake Road passes through the facility. All that lighting is being redone. I don't know if I'm sure you've driven through it, and it's so dark and dingy. The new MDOT requirements require higher foot candle levels and better control. This scope repairs this facility and extends its useful life. It also brings it up to current code requirements, which is critical in a renovation such as this. But everything was documented and quantified and turned over to AUK, who prepared a detailed cost estimate, breaking it into several categories so that the project can move forward. We can take a good hard look at it, identify the most important aspects of renovation, and proceed in an orderly manner. I think, Jerry, I believe you're going to kind of take it over from here and walk through some of the costs, et cetera.
Sure. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
So as Dave stated, we did take a look at the detail that was put together in schematic estimate. One thing to note is that Dave's team continues to work. The estimate is reflected of probably about 20% complete design. So they will complete their design and continue to work forward. The work is not done yet. We have more to do. As you see on the screen, you can see that the estimate currently is at $20.7 million for the total cost, which includes the critical cost of roughly $14.8 million, the necessary cost of $1.8, the recommended cost of $1.1, and the plaza cost of $2.9. Those are all rounded numbers that I've given you. There's some more exact numbers on the screen. I wanted to read those just in case anybody is tuning in from their phone and can't see the screen. One thing with this, with the numbers, I think sometimes can get lost, is that this is over a 1.1 million square foot structure that we're talking about. And if you were to consider a home like I live in, which is a 3-bedroom, 1,500 square foot ranch, you can fit 778 homes inside this structure. Also, if you look at this in terms of what would this be, it is all elevated vehicle traffic on it. This would be roughly a 4-mile bridge if you took this structure and laid it out in a 2-lane fashion in a bridge. You know, as we all know from the governor's campaign, fixing things like that costs money, and we see where we're at here. Other thing to state with this is that any kind of structure, as we look at many recommendations, 1 to 2%, usually in that 2% range, is the cost it is to maintain a building or structure. And that's of the replacement cost, the current replacement cost. This structure, that would mean somewhere in the $1.5 million to $2 million a year needs to be invested in this structure to maintain it. Now, that doesn't mean that you spend that much money every year, but as you can envision from your home, you have a roof, the roof lasts about 20 years. Well, in that year, 18, 19, or 20, you're going to be investing in a roof. Same is true with a commercial building or with a structure like this, that there comes a point where these man-made structures need maintenance in order to maintain and stay. As you see, one of the major items on this is structural, the 4.7 million. That is not something that is a surprise when you consider that the structure itself has not been maintained for a decade. And you can see Mother Nature, any one of us that owns a home like I do that requires painting, you know that if you don't get out there and paint that wood siding, Mother Nature's going to win, and she's going to degrade the wood siding, make it rot, make it rust, unless you paint it. One of the items that Dave's team identified and we saw is like the security mesh that's out on this structure. There's a lot of it, as you can imagine. It's a big structure. And in their previous study, about 75% of it could have been probably scrape painted and saved. But now as you go out there, most of that screening, if you go and you press with your finger, you can push and deform it. And we know that we're not going to be able to save that. So this estimate, just one example there, there's about $400,000 additional work now that's degraded in the past couple of years of more rust and decay. That's true across the board with the doors, frames, hardware, many of the architectural pieces. And as we look at this, the issue of funding, and that was good. The next screen. We talk about where we're at with what would $7 million do. And the tricky part with this is once this project starts moving, the train doesn't stop with the $7 million. The $7 million won't quite cover what we need for the structural items, the ordering of the long lead electrical items that are necessary to connect all the lighting and all the other items, the elevators, all those other things. So with the $7 million, we could get the structural done, the elevators ordered, and the long lead electrical just about purchased, but then all of the work to install all those things is not able. So, you know, we really need to look at this whole project holistically and completely to make sure that we maintain and are able to achieve what the desired results are and what the required results are for this this project. So with that, I'll turn it over to Matt Gibb, if you're ready.
Actually, we're going to turn this back to Mayor Waterman just for a second. I know that people seeing these numbers for the first time and recognizing that they're now hard numbers that would give the, as Mr. DeLenar said, the ability to create bid packages, continue to generate lots of questions. And so, Madam Mayor, if you would be willing to share just a little bit, I've put up on the screen here the source of where people can continue to make comment with their questions and their concerns. But if you wanted to share a couple of those thoughts that have already come in that kind of set the stage of where do we go now that this good team has presented these numbers to us.
Thank you, Matt. And for those of you who may have just joined us, we are at the public town hall teleconference regarding the Phoenix Center. You have just heard the presentation of IDS, which is the architectural and engineering firm that was retained by the city, who's given their report. The first time you're hearing it right now about the cost estimates and the architectural renderings that they will do for the Phoenix Center as retained by the city of Pontiac and voted by the city council. Let me also say that many of you have made public comment and statements, particularly regarding the FAQ that was sent out, the frequently asked questions, and also at the council meeting. Last Tuesday's meeting, a number of you made comments, and some of you have sent in comments since. We also will have time for questions and answers here. And there is a chat room function that if you want to send in any questions that you might have to the chat room, we do have people who are surveying those, and we'll be able to cover some of those as we move forward later on in this presentation. And also I wanted to say that this isn't open. We wanted to be transparent. We want the public to be informed of what's happening with this asset, as well as what the responsibility that the city signed on to when the settlement agreement was agreed to and signed. Excuse me. We did invite every member of the city council. I personally invited, as well as invitation was sent out. But I personally invited every member of the city council, and some of them are here for this presentation, as well as our elected officials, many of whom want to be involved in the process and to hear their voices. I know Commissioner Angela Powell is part of this. Also, Senator Rosemary Bayer, who may not be here right now, but she sends her greetings and wants to be part of the process, and has said she may be detained, but I didn't want to announce her. We also invited Representative Brenda Carter, because those are the representatives for whom this is a very important issue. The first public comment I would like to share with you is one from Fernando Bales. I'm reading the names because these were read during public comment at the last council meeting on April 28th. For those of you who would like to have your voice heard, and we encourage that because we want to hear from you, that can be done by submitting your public comment by email, and that address is on the screen right there. For the council meetings on Tuesdays, it must be done no later than 5:30 p.m. received by the clerk, and for this coming meeting will be May 5th. But that address that you send to the emails is publiccomments@pontiac.mi.us. Once again, public comments at pontiac.mi.us. We can leave that screen up for those of you who want to send in public comment to have your voice heard, because it counts, and you count in the city of Pontiac, and we want to listen to our citizens, our residents, even our observers who are interested in the progress of the city of Pontiac. The first public comment I'm going to read is from Mr. Fernando Bales. He says, I have lived in Pontiac since 2011. I want to say that it would be a shame to lose the Phoenix Center. I'm an architect and a professor of architecture at Lawrence Tech University. In 2014, the owner of the Ottawa Towers graciously gave my students and myself a tour of the Phoenix Center. The students were absolutely floored by how amazing of a space it was. My students came up with countless ideas of what the space could be used for and how it could be transformed to serve many uses when not being used for concerts. It is such a unique asset to the city because it is an elevated platform that can both serve vehicular traffic and pedestrian movement directly downtown. The only question myself and my students had was simply, why isn't it being used? I have hopes that this can still serve as an asset to the city and that Pontiac can seize the opportunity it presents. Thank you, Mr. Bales. The next one I would like to read, and I'm not going to read this name because this was submitted to the office subsequent to the council meeting. So I do encourage anybody who has these thoughts, and I did encourage her as well, if you want these to be public announced, then send them for public comments to that email address before 5:30 each Tuesday before the council meeting, and they will be read at the council meeting. But this one reads, please apply for bonds to finance this debt now, while we still have enough good credit rating to qualify. Please don't wait to realize the city doesn't have sufficient funding to cover this debt and defaults, blowing our credit rating, rendering us unable to secure bond funding. We, the taxpayers, are unable to shoulder the $770 minimum increase in taxes. May God bless and give his guidance. Thank you for your comment. The next one I would like to read, and we received many of these, but I'm just kind of having a selective covering of some of the ones that we received. All right, and this is from Mr. James Smith. Once again, this I believe also was read at the council meeting. And it's quite lengthy here, but I'm going to go right down to the last point he made. It says, let's not lose the Phoenix Center. We have a crisis in the world, and we still have business to take care of so that Pontiac can recover from this. He said, the deadline for the Phoenix Center, is it extended or is it still November? Let's not afford, we can't afford to have our taxes go up or lose the Phoenix Center or have something that will bankrupt the city. He said the same thing happened with the Silverdome. This caused a mess that somebody else is reaping the benefits of. I don't know how we attracted Amazon behaving like this, but it looks like they're going to be here. We need things to keep getting better in Pontiac, not worse. I think the bonds are the smartest choice to fulfill this obligation. Pontiac doesn't need to lose anything else or make it any worse on taxpayers. Thank you for that. Okay, the next one I will read is from Mr. Johnny Hooker Borders, one of the musicians in town, famous musicians. He says, the Phoenix Center is a great place. If we as a city would invest and run it in the right way, it would be a blessing to the world. Right here, some of the greatest talents in the world came. It's a cash cow. So many people of all walks of life would come and it would bring business and would be a place we could build, share, and grow. I used to work for the Phoenix Center and it made money, much money. Thank you, Mr. Borders. And the last one I will read for this section is also was read at City Council meeting. And it says, it is imperative that our elected officials work towards restoring and reopening the Phoenix Plaza, as we will need a central outdoor location that we can build on once we have reached our quote-unquote new normal. Although it will take some time for us to return to the carefree days of outdoor packed activities, it makes no sense that we continue to allow this facility to crumble while the restoration costs will continue to increase. Let's be proactive for once instead of our traditional reactive, because we have waited until we have no other options. And this is from our own Dwayne Anthony Lyons, a musician in town and also a member of our executive staff and community development. So with that, just a sampling of the many comments we have. We do invite your comments because you count in the city of Pontiac, taxpayers and citizens. We want to hear from you as we're guided to the next steps. And with that, that will be the prologue to the introduction to Attorney Matt Gibb. He has been a very instrumental part of our economic development team here in the city of Pontiac. And one of the projects he's been working on very much is the whole development of the Phoenix Center and being able to fulfill the settlement terms. So he's going to talk about next steps now that we have heard from IDS and from ALF. And with that, I would like to give you the floor, Mr. Gibb, and following that, we will begin to answer some of the questions that have been posed.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I want to make sure that I'm unmuted. Yes, good. I'm good. Good to go, I think. So listen, real quick, there's been a few questions that have come in that could get answered real quickly, and then some will be answered in my presentation. One of them is, are there similar projects that have been recently completed, and how do the estimates compare with those projects? There hasn't been anything real specific to the predicament that Pontiac finds it's in with the Phoenix Center. The Coble Hall, now called TCF Center, the reclamation of the garage and the structures in that particular area do coincide pretty closely. I was a member of the administration of Oakland County, helping represent the Coble Authority at that time. It's very closely related. I would say that a new garage of this size, you can do a very simple calculation when you're looking at the cost of a garage. It would be about $27,000 per parking space. And so this garage is approximately 2,600 parking spaces. If you multiply 27,000 times 2,600, you're going to get a number that's going to push the cost of this garage as being built new up towards 80 to $100 million. And so we're very mindful of those cost numbers. There's another question about what are we doing about security now and during renovation so that further damage doesn't happen. Our DPW in the city, Mr. Dan Ringo, Mr. John Ballion, and others have done a phenomenal job of making sure that the facility has been secure. The challenge has been is that because it's sat and there's been some delays that have happened, that the certain aspects of it have really denigrated and almost disintegrated. And so the security has a plan behind it going forward. One of the comments was about, well, if we do bond financing, what's the timeline of that? So let's get into my presentation. Well, I think we'll be able to answer some of these questions, and we'll get back to the chat questions in a few minutes. Important milestones. Really important milestones to this are the timeline. We were able to contract with IDS with the help of AUK and get them under contract in early March, and already we're meeting exactly the timeline. We're where the red arrow says. We're at receiving the schematic estimates, which are the actual dollars to work with. What's the next step? Well, the bid packages and the structural programs and the elevator, the parts ordering really has to go next. And so what does that mean? We have a timeline, and this is a little snapshot of the timeline that Mr. DiLeonardo showed earlier. It breaks down how rapidly we're trying to get ourselves caught up. You'll notice right in the middle of it, though, 4 months late of what was projected as the design phase of this. And it's really important to know where we are from being in a position of being late. It doesn't mean that we're in default. It doesn't mean that someone is going to penalize the city. It's just our recognition that we can't be late anymore. We must work collectively together now to meet every timeline that I'm about to go through to make sure that we're caught up in a way that we can move this forward. And so you can see this from a timeline and the dates on there. The date of May 18th, 2020 is when bid packages and structural packages are really are there. But understand this, July above the bidding and awards is right around the corner, but it's also up against a very, very important deadline of November 1st. We have to complete certain things by November 1st. And there's two core elements of this that has to be done. There's not a maybe. There's not a, can we go back and ask to renegotiate? There's not, well, maybe they'll take pity on us, or maybe they'll give us a break. None of that's going to happen here. We have two specific elements that have to be met within this timeline that's going forward. And these maintenance and improvements and the electrical lighting, elevator, and serious structural repairs all must be done by November 1st. So my question on the top is, why can't the city just do what it can, and what's in the general fund balance? Well, it's because we have this big block of work. What you've heard today in the first 40 minutes of this presentation is everything that David from IDS walked through of those 7 categories. This is what we're committed to. And we've already been given pre-notice, has been noticed at prior council meetings. The owner is anticipating that this good city is going to default. They've put us on notice of that. And you can see just in these 2 pictures, there's hundreds of pictures. The quality of what we're dealing with to restore is so challenging. But this is so important that our timeline is November 1st, and it means all of this. It means all of this. So if we were to do part of it, say we were to do part of it just from the fund balance, and I know I'm clicking back and forth within these timelines, what we have to meet, won't that mean we're just in substantial compliance? And people have said, well, maybe we could just do part of this. I'm imploring you as an attorney and as an advocate for the city that the settlement agreement has the same effect as a judgment. And everybody that's watching this town hall knows what a judgment means, right? Just because we've settled on terms doesn't mean that they're negotiable. Those terms are a consent judgment. The judgment cannot be satisfied with substantially comply. It doesn't work. Without a party on the other side saying, you know what, I'm going to let you off the hook, then you can't just do part of it. So we can't put $7 million. We can't even put all of our general fund balance into the Phoenix Center and say that, you know what, that's the best we could do. But, you know, we're kind of substantially part of the way there. Is that going to work? The city's obligated to pay and perform the work outlined in the settlement agreement because it's a judgment against the city in the same way that there's other obligations. So I put an example here. Listen, if the court told me I owed $100,000 to someone and there was a judgment against me for me, I can't just say, well, you know what, I'm going to throw 50 at it and I'm going to consider that I've substantially complied. It just does not work that way, folks. And so what needs to happen next? We've got some very, very specific timelines that have to be met. So what happens in the month of May? We're in the month of May. It's May 1st. The sun is out there. We're all going to get happy because we're going to see life start to come back to order during this month. What does IDS have to do? They have to complete the bid packages within this month. That timeline of May 18th and through towards the end of May, they have to complete the bid packages. Those bid packages will say, all right, contractor, tradesperson, supplier, bid on delivering those services to us, bid on delivering the scope of materials, bid on bringing those light packages to us. All of those bid documents will coincide with the financial numbers we have here. What does Pontiac have to do? Well, we got to confirm exactly what we want to have done. Critical and necessary costs are those that are absolutely within the settlement agreement. They have to be done. Those numbers that Jerry showed earlier, those amount to between $16 and $17 million. There is no getting out of those numbers. There is no getting it halfway. We must, as a city, do that work. The other thing we have to decide is, are we going to do additional recommendations? And are we going to fully restore the plaza so that it can be open again as a revenue generator and an entertainment outlet for the city? That has to be done in May. We can't do that in June. We can't do it in September. We can't do it in December. We have to do that in May. We have to determine exactly what we're going to do. And we have to approve a funding source in May. And I'll talk about funding sources in a second. We must approve a funding source. AUK and IDS cannot go out for bid. AUK cannot submit bids unless they know that the city has a methodology to pay for all of it. So if we're going to bid $16 million worth of work to meet the judgment and not be in default, then AUK needs to know the city has a plan on how to pay for it. I, as your representative, need to know how you're going to pay for it. What do we do in June? We've determined how we're going to pay for this. AUK releases the bids. Then the city has to secure the funding source. So the question that was asked a minute ago on the chat of, well, what's the timeline of it? Decide how we're going to fund in May, secure the funding source in June, and then in the month of July, you start to award bids, you start to commence work, and you'll see within the timeline that this is how this all fits together. So how can Pontiac pay for this? Well, we know our general fund, and the general fund balance has about $13 million in it right now. And over the last several years, the city has built that up. And if we don't use that, the city can reserve that in a way that would be responsive to the COVID-19 crisis, because we know we're going to take an impact. It would be responsive to other things. If we spend it all, say we spent all 12 million, we wouldn't be meeting the 15% reserve requirement. We'd spend all of the savings account for the city. As you've seen, it's not enough. The general fund, there's not enough money in the fund balance to pay for this. There's just not. You can't do it halfway. You can't say we'll take part of it and do part of this, because as Jerry said, you can't start this work and then quit for 6 months and go fight it out in the court and then restart it, because the restart would be an additional $2 to $3 million of new general construction conditions for restarting the work, which means your $16 to $20 million project immediately goes to $25 million just because you decided to pause. There's not enough money there. So could we find private investors? Could we seek a public-private partnership? Absolutely. My plan is to present that to City Council so that they can see the options. They can look at if someone came in and bought the Ottawa Towers, could they buy the litigation issues? Absolutely. What does that mean? They also have to buy the repairs to the garage. We now know that at a minimum, it's about $17 million to repair everything. It's 20 to 21 million to get it fully functioning back to a revenue generating venue. Whoever buys that is also buying the knowledge of those dollars are there. But you could do it. You could find a buyer. The city could, there's all different ways that you could look at this. The last version is bonds. Do we issue bonds? The city can issue bonds and use its really good credit rating. Now, you guys have worked as a city for 5 years now to build yourself back up to a AA credit rating. To use that credit rating, the low interest rates, and finance all of this over a period of likely to be 20 years. So you can finance that. The revenue forecasting that your finance director is doing shows if we stay on track, that we can build up and pay for those forecasted debt services of a bond package to do all of this work out of the revenue generation of the city going forward. And it's anticipated that would mean no new taxes. So your options are general fund, which is a non-starter. You can't do it out of your general fund. There's not enough money there. If you do that, then everybody gets a tax increase. If you decide to do a private, public-private partnership, certainly there's options there, different ways to look at that. Right now, the most sensible way to look at this in the timeline is, could we issue bonds as a city and pay those over 20 years to meet this obligation? So if we do fund it, what's it mean? I put an arrow over the date of the month of November here. That's when we're supposed to be done. We're supposed to be done. You see this, I used a slide here. This is actually not the right one. This is a slide that I used as we were trying to get IDS approved and up and running. That was going to have us 4.5 months late. Now we're really 6 months late on the whole construction phase of this. As a city, you need to trust in your attorneys and your council that we will deal with whatever the court throws our way, but we can only deal with this schedule that we're going to be so drastically behind on is if in the month of May, the city elects exactly what it wants done, recognizing a minimum of 16 to 17 million, and here's how we're going to pay for it, allowing OC to do the bids. And in June, we get the bid process moving, and in July, we start to award bids. If we don't keep that timetable, then this really is blown, and we start talking about a different thing. So what happens if the city defaults? And I want to be real specific here, and I've been specific, but not maybe this specific. Here's what happens, all right? So the Ottawa Tower owners, who are the plaintiff in the litigation, they would file back to the court. They go through the mediator, Judge Rosen, but it would go back to the court, and they would demand that the court find Pontiac in default. The agreement says we have to complete all this by November 1st. If we don't do that, and this is where substantial effort would be an argument, but the court would be considering whether Ottawa Tower's request to hold us in default should be granted or not. The court would then consider 2 areas of penalty against Pontiac if we are in default. So what if we're decided that we've defaulted as a city? There's damages. As an attorney, any attorney will tell you that if I was arguing for Ottawa Towers, I'd be saying I'm damaged. It's been delayed. It will be delayed additional time, losing lost rent, losing other scale of use of the property, continuing declining of rent value because of the damages to the tower, all of those things. Ottawa Towers have already told us that they anticipate there's a minimum cash award that would exceed $10 million as an estimate of damage in the event that we default. That $10 million is a lot of money, and it's over and above anything else. But they can also ask the court to say, you know what, we still need to fix the garage to make it usable for our interest. That's what the litigation was all about. So let us repair it. You know what? The court would probably say yes to that. We already know that it costs $17 million if we do it. I can't imagine what it would cost if Ottawa Towers decides to do it, because they would be engaging their own resources. So the court would assess these damages. They'd look at it and say, you know what? Ottawa Towers is probably entitled to costs and attorney's fees for all of that. We already have paid as a city a huge number in that. Guess what? They'd get it all over again, because the city defaulted. The city didn't come in May and say, here's how we're going to do this and here's how we're going to pay for it. In June, here's the bid packages. July, we start awarding, giving the tools to the attorneys for the city to counter any request for a default that said we are now moving in unison as a city. So what happens? Pontiac could be assessed damages in excess of $30 million. And if you think I'm exaggerating, I'm not exaggerating. Not at all. We could be as a city, and I'm saying we because you know what? My business is here. I'm sitting in my office right now in downtown Pontiac. I'm part of this too, and I pay taxes in the city. So Pontiac could be assessed damages in excess of $30 million. Well, how does it get paid? In this instance, it's reasonably likely that payment would be ordered immediately. You might get some structure to it. So what does that mean? A one-time levy against every taxpayer in Pontiac. How many taxpayers do we have in Pontiac that can afford $30 million potentially in damages? Say it's only half. Say it's $15 million, just as a damage, as a one-time payment. We can seek a financing mechanism that will allow us to bond finance on good credit over 20 years and let the general fund budget and the operational budget pay for this entire calamity out of that and not affect our taxpayers. Or we can risk ourselves to go into default, allow the court to decide if maybe upwards of $30 million as a damage award to get the city out of this, and then a one-time levy. I know for sure, we said $750 earlier. Every residence would get hit far more than that, far more than that. And so we open it up to questions and answers. And I didn't mean to leave it on such a negative note, but it is kind of a negative note. The timeline is what the timeline is. And I would implore everybody that's watching this, I know we've got good council people, and I so respect all members of our council. They're doing such a heavy job of having to deal with this. We can't get to meetings in the future, whether they're Tuesday, May 5th, or whether they're Tuesday, May 26th, and say, you know what, we need to think about it some more, or we need to determine maybe this direction is not the best because we're up against it now. And so we've got professionals putting together, professionals representing, and now we really have to take into consideration what we're going to do, how we're going to pay for it, and let's get these bids going and move it forward. So with that, Madam Mayor, I'm going to turn this back over to you. I'll pull up the chat function, and we can start to answer some of these questions. All right.
Thank you very much, Matt. And once again, we're here for the teleconference town hall on the Phoenix Center. We have just had excellent presentations, both from IDS and from ALC. And during the presentations, we have had a number of people who have submitted questions to the chat. Bryn Gustafson has helped to gather those for us, and I'll be able to read those so the panel can answer them to augment this part of this presentation. Also, I've gotten some texts from various people who are here. I want to announce that James Johnson of Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence's staff is also here. We're so happy that Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence has been such an excellent representative, amazing for the city of Pontiac as in her district. Right now, she's fighting the good fight in Washington, D.C. To make sure that some of this funding that is coming down for COVID-19 relief gets visited to communities of our size and not just the larger communities, 500,000. So we thank the Congresswoman for that and do extend our well wishes to her. Mr. Johnson, thank you for being part and representing her here at this conference. We also have several council people who are here. I do know that Councilwoman of Mary Pila of District 3 is here. I also got a text from Council President Kermit Williams. There may be others. I just don't have a chance to go through that list, but please announce yourself if you are here, and people are texting me as we're going through. So we've had some questions that are here, and if the panel consists of the presenters who are here, as well as I'll introduce Mr. Tony Chubb, who is also here as part of the Zoom conference, and he is our one of the city attorneys representing the firm of G. Markham, Mullins and Horton, as well as the deputy mayor is here. And thank you for some of the other citizens and business owners who are here in town. Mr. Bob Wan is here. I also see Mr. Alan Bishop is here, and many people are downtown. Sorry, I can't recognize everybody, but these are the ones who've been able to text me here to let me know that they are here. And in addition to the fact, I see Mr. Tom Kimball of the Oakland University Pontiac Partnership. So these are all leaders who have been involved in the process. Some of our other downtown people, I don't want to get started naming them. I see you too, David Derbyshire. Some of the people who have served on the boards and commissions, Christopher Northcross and the Planning Commission, who have worked so diligently and have offered their time to be able to move the city forward. So I thank you all for everything you have done to help to support Pontiac and help Pontiac's progress and continue to do so. So with that, let's move on to some of the questions.
Mayor, we have a couple of questions here. I have them up. One of them is the Senator Bear is asking, can we make the presentations available? Absolutely. The slide deck today, as well as the report of IDS and other materials we have are always available. We'll be sending this to, because we couldn't send it to council yesterday because today was the deadline and IDS performed on their deadline. So everything that you're hearing or you have will be made available through the council. It'll be in the council packet as well as available through the mayor's office. And again, I remind everyone that you can contact any of us, or if you have questions going forward, to make sure you contact us. Another question, but a question aside from that. So,
Matt, also let me tell people that it's available also through the cable channel. We have a cable channel here. This will be broadcast there. We also have a YouTube channel. It'll be available anytime you want to watch on a YouTube channel, as well as our Facebook page. So this will be played as an entirety, and it will be available on those means as well. So for people who didn't get a chance to see it here, it will be available for you to see it in repeat shows.
So we have a couple of questions. So one is, what is the estimated cost to get in operation? And as the numbers showed earlier, the total cost, if the city were to elect to also take on the work to get the plaza and the Phoenix Center amphitheater completely in operation, would be between $20 and $21 million, according to the cost estimates. And then it's the next question, the same person is, I read that the bonds will come from a capital improvement budget. What does that mean for taxpayers? And so, Mayor, I throw it to the panel or to you, or maybe to Mr. Chubb or someone, or Dan Ringo that could answer that. What does it mean to taxpayers that bonds would come from the capital improvement budget?
These are capital improvement bonds. The thing about capital improvement bonds and the distinction of that, capital improvement bonds are often used by municipalities and by other entities to pay things that are high-ticket items that they couldn't afford or shouldn't prudently afford through the regular budget. I'll let the city attorney also convey that, but we've had a number of presentations to council and to the city, both by the financial advisor that we hired, Mr. Brian Leffler of Baird, as well as the bond counsel that we hired, Mr. Ron Lipscomb of the Miller Canfield firm. And they have made those presentations to express to council just how that mode of financing would be using. Now, we have not stressed anything that council has to do in terms of financing. We've given all the options there, so they can consider that. And so that's one of the options, and that's one that, from a poll, 85% of our citizens favor. So if Mr. Chubb wants to go on and explain the use of capital improvement bonds, but as well, compare that now with the other kinds of bonds, such as this photo just approved, $140 million worth of school bonds. The school bonds, the difference is that that was for a millage, which means taxpayers will pay millage, and that will be on their tax bills. Capital improvement bonds, we have factored those if the city decides to use those, if the council votes on those. Those will not appeal on people's tax bills because we have factored the payment for those into what our budget might be. That's already predicted in the 5-year budget. If we do that, we wanted to think ahead to make sure that this would not be an increase on taxpayers. That was part of that. So with that, Mr. Chubb, if you want to add on that to anything I've said in terms of how capital improvement bonds are used by municipalities.
Sure. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. And I think you explained it really well. The theory behind a capital improvement bond is it operates much like a mortgage. When you buy a house, you don't pay cash typically due to the cost and due to the realization that it'll be usable for 30 years. A capital improvement bond works very much like that, and the length of the repayment is tied to the useful life of the improvement. And so we've determined that the useful life of the Phoenix Center is at least 20 years with the improvements that we're going to make. And so it only makes sense that we would pay it back over those 20 years rather than as one big chunk. And I think the most important distinction, though, is to understand that in our current position, we can use capital improvement bonds to go ahead and make this improvement and absorb those 20 years of payments in the general fund budget. If we are compelled back to court due to a breach and we are given a judgment against us, we are not able to use capital improvement bonds. And that will almost certainly, as Mr. Gibb noted, result in a judgment levy that we have no control of, that the county has no control of, and that will go on everyone's tax bills as one payment, the entire payment divided over everyone. And so, you know, the amounts are insurmountable. It could exceed $1,000. We don't know. Capital improvement bonds allow us to keep this in control and allow us as the city management to absorb those costs in a yearly basis that will in no way affect taxes, nor will it affect the services that the city provides.
All right, I have two questions that would be answered by probably by Vince from AUK. One is, will AUK or IDS work to hire Pontiac workers on any phase of this project going forward? And the second question, Vince, I'll give them to you both so you can work on it, which is, what are we doing about securing the work site once this gets going so that there's not further vandalism? I'm sure that's contemplated in your general conditions, but if you could speak to what the plan would be to make sure that Pontiac workers get a chance to become employed as a result of this, and also how are you going to secure the site and who pays for that as we go forward?
Okay. First on Pontiac workers, ALC has been very active in the Pontiac community to encourage workforce development. In the construction industry, we need more participants, so that we've been active working with the various programs, the Marshall Plan with Pontiac schools, with the Committee of 50. We've sit in those committees, and each year ALC has hired, say, 2 apprentices from Pontiac to start exposing people to the construction workforce. What we'll do is encourage. It only makes sense for people, for contractors working in the area to hire Pontiac workers. So that'll be something that will be part of our pre-bid conferences and also will be communicated in our bidding documents to encourage local community involvement. Regarding security, any of our team members can discuss that, but the bottom line is any of our construction projects, we need to provide that security so further damages to the project don't occur. That security, though, I will tell you, will be focused on safety. You know, we don't want people entering a construction site that could be injured. So it's both with the idea of safety, number one priority. Number two is to protect the owner's property, contractors' tools and equipment. Security will be part of that program.
So we
I
have
have a few questions from this end too, Matt.
Oh, yeah.
If you want.
Go ahead, Mark.
Okay. How can the Phoenix Center be used to generate revenue for the city, and what are the opportunities for that once it is improved? Anybody want to tackle that one?
Mayor, if you would like me to speak on it, I think there's a tremendous opportunity for revenue in several ways. Initially, the Detroit Regional Convention Facility Authority was very interested in partnering with us as a city because they recognized an opportunity for revenue derived directly from parking revenue. And so people paying to park in the Phoenix Center, which is only multiplied if we complete the work on the top so that we can have concerts and other activities there, which allows for revenue both during the workday as well as in the weekends and evenings. But what that also does is drive economic development downtown. And when we drive economic development downtown, we also raise revenue in two different ways. It makes the valuation of the properties go up, which will increase property taxes. It'll also drive jobs downtown, which will drive income tax revenue.
All right. Next question. I have another one on this side, Matt, as you get those two. You mentioned the $7 million. Why did that come up, and what was council's action regarding a $7 million resolution?
So, Mayor, the request of council, and it's really good that the council was asking this specific question on its front end. We have a fund balance of about $13 million, and what we mean by that is the general fund balance. The budget of the city is quite large, but in the general fund balance, there's about 13 million. And there's a rule, pretty hard and fast rule, that the city should maintain at least 15% of that against the total amount of the budget, which is about $6 million, which leaves $7 million. And I'm doing round numbers here, Mayor. So the city was asking, well, what is the total amount above if we just reduced ourselves down to that $15 million, or that $5.9 million, that 15% there? And they were asking, well, so how much money would be available? So on its face, it's good to be, to fiscally understand where you're at. All right, what are our smallest limit? What's our highest limit? What do we have to work with for the good fiscal balancing of the city? But then council took action to say we want to dedicate that $7 million surplus towards this project, towards the Phoenix Center structural repairs. And the administration, myself included as special counsel on this project, really asserted that it's not a good fiscal practice because it's not enough. I mean, if the city had $35 million sitting in a general fund balance somewhere, then well, maybe you'd look at it and say, well, is it wise to take half of that? But they would be taking really everything over and above the minimum value of keeping your budget in a position where you're trying to keep a reserve in the event of an emergency or an anomaly in the budget. So the council took action last week to say, no, we'd like to move that $7 million without much comment really at the council meeting. But that's the action that they took. And in my presentation, it's just not enough. And if we were to take the $7 million from that was allocated or moved by action of the council last week and say, well, let's just use that and see where we get, then it goes back to the same arguments of it only gets us part of the way, less than half of the way, really, if we're looking at it clearly. We wouldn't be able to stop construction. And it's kind of like if you bought a bunch of light fixtures and they came in and then you ran out of money, guess what happens? All the light fixtures sit in the warehouse. They don't go anywhere. And that's really what that would be looking at. So yeah, that's the answer to that question.
A follow up on that question from a couple of observers is what happens next? Will the mayor veto that resolution from the city council? So I'd like to have you help me on that. Is something that is going to be before me. So let's hear from our financial advisors. And we know we've talked about that behind the scenes, but I'd like to be transparent and share that with the public, what that quandary is and what the danger is if that is allowed to stand.
Well, I can answer that too, Mayor, just from a practical standpoint. Is certainly the mayor has a right to veto that action of council. I mean, the interesting thing from, and I won't put our fiscal interim fiscal director Erwin Williams on the spot, but just because the money within the budget is moved from one line item to another doesn't mean that it has to get spent, and so there is that provision there. But it really comes down to the reaction of our city council and the public and the direction that this goes starting at Tuesday's meeting. I mean, there's a procedural aspect for you to veto something. The clerk has to post notice of the action, and then that gives you a timetable to decide whether that would be proper to veto. So I'm not going to decide for you. I'm sure you're contemplating that. But the more important question is can we, as a community, come together, generate the idea, get the public commenting so that we know their thoughts and their ideas around this, and beginning at Tuesday night's meeting, now that we know the numbers, now that we know the timeline, and can we move this forward, that might really eliminate the veto question altogether, Mayor. So yeah, you could. It's certainly a possibility, but I'm hopeful that we'll move this forward as a whole package starting on Tuesday night.
Sounds good. And it turns out when you're elected by the electorate to make a decision, the buck stops here. So thank you for those of you that I listen to, and I listen to people who make sense and have the good interest of the city at heart, as I do as well.
We're getting towards 3:15 now, and so the attention span of our good residents here has been great. But I want to just do a couple more questions that came in from the chat side, and one of them is really important. So it says, if council, I'm going to read it, it's not my words, but if council, God forbid, chooses to default on the judgment, how much would property tax in the city increase and for how long? I'm just going to reiterate that if the city elects to default, when I say the elect, it would be a choice, really. I mean, it would be saying, you know what, we're not, as a city, the mayor's office isn't going to recommend anything and the city's not going to approve anything. I mean, all of us could make mistakes here, but if the court decides that the city did default in its obligation, what does that mean? It means that there would be a damage award and the garage would still have to be either demolished or restored in some fashion. All that would come into play. How much taxes would that increase? It could be levied in 1 year or it could be levied over a series of years. Not likely to be very long though. And so I would estimate that the increase would be somewhere as a one-time levy of probably between $17 and $25 million. That would be paid out over the city, allocated according to your current tax position. So if you're a business, then that would get allocated to you by ratio of what your ratio to the total tax base is in the city. And so the follow-up question that same person had, what are the tax implications for maintenance of the Phoenix Center if we do get this completed? Well, the maintenance going forward is what Attorney Chubb said, which is there's some options for the city to consider third parties to come in and operate and maintain the facility itself, which would generate revenue that would offset that ongoing long-term maintenance. That's the whole goal here, is to get it operational and functional. There's a project at 140 South Saginaw that is ready to move forward. There's already a development agreement with the city that would require them to have a parking agreement with the Phoenix Center itself. That would be a generator of revenue. And lastly, Mayor, there's other aspects that will be presented to council that there are third parties that would look and say, what if we were to finance the improvements and the overall project structure, and then work that and maintain that structure for a period of years with the idea of transitioning it back to the city? That will get presented to city council as well, because it's a viable way of looking at it. So the answer to that question of how does maintenance get covered long-term, it would be derived out of the revenues generated as this gets to be a functioning facility again.
And that was what the Detroit Regional brought in their proposal. Apparently they were turned away by city council, although we hope maybe we can bring them back. That was the group that had Cobo Hall had turned that around, the parking garage there as well as other parking garages, and they saw in the Phoenix Center an opportunity to do that, to bring that expertise, to bring it up and to develop not only the parking potential but also the other revenue potential. So unfortunately, that was not accepted by council, and also they would have lowered our maintenance costs. They were going to do it for $1,000 a month just because they thought they could get other revenue. Whereas what we're paying now with the maintenance contracts we have to have, just because we have to maintain the Phoenix Center garage, is about $9,000 a month. So unfortunately, the city taxpayers are going to be stuck with $170,000 more that they wouldn't have to pay using that other alternative. But we don't want to, and then I saw a note that you said, and there's some other thoughts here, and I want to end with a couple questions that talk about the vision of the Phoenix Center and how we're doing what we're doing. Number one is that we've heard you talk about bonds. We're taking the $7 million out of the general fund surplus, decrease the bondability of the city to get the remaining funds to complete the terms of the settlement agreement. All right. Tony Chubb or Matt, or talk about that.
I can speak to that, Mayor. Yeah, so in working with Brian Loeffler, who's a vice president at Baird, very respected in the municipal bonding area, he, as Mr. Gibb noted, thought that we would currently be able to get a AA rating, which is a terrific rating, almost right at the top. And one of the main drivers of that is that over the past several years, the mayor and the council and the residents have all worked on a resurgence of the city that's resulted in that $13 million of liquid general fund revenue or balance rather. And so he noted that as a main driver in how we would get that AA rating. Now, if we take the $7 million out, expend it all, and only then determine, council determines that's the proper time to go out to bond, first of all, there's a timing issue. And so what that would likely result in is a notice of breach from Ottawa Towers. And so then we would be hitting the bond market with our bare minimum in the bank and a lawsuit pending or threatened against us for, as Matt said, Mr. Gibbs said, could be, claiming up to $30 million. And so the result is, if the bank wants to give you a loan, are they going to give you a loan when you have a lot of money in the bank or when you've stripped it down to the minimum and the creditors are on your back? If you can get the loan, it could be at multiple percents higher. So if right now with a AA, we could get that 20-year bond at 3%, in the circumstances I referenced, either we won't be able to get it or it's going to be multiples higher than that.
Thank you very much. Anyone else I want to add to that discussion? If not, I'm going to want to leave on an up note, and we hope that this has been informative. We've had some comments, many of you thinking, thank you for the information. Appreciative that we're making a transparent process, particularly because this has been a long process. From the time 6 years ago when I came into office and the city was in deficit and we were going to be forced to give away the Phoenix Center, much like we had lost other assets and the Silverdome included. We are now in a different position. The city has fought long and hard to come back to financial stability. And the other thing that happens today, as I mentioned, is that I will be giving the budget document to our city council members as a mayor's recommended budget. And one of the things I explain in the budget letter to council members is the fact that all of these projections and all of these expenditures and revenues that we're talking about are dependent upon the fact that the two major settlement agreements that the city has, the one for the Phoenix Center and the one for the Cypria retiree health litigation that we also have found a settlement for, it depends upon those being successfully done. If either one of those goes south or is adversely affected in any way, that means that all the projections and the surplus that we had would be in danger. So that's the caveat I give. Now, the last question I would like to end on, as we're looking at that picture there that reminds us of the glory days of the Phoenix Center Amphitheater, which we hope to see again with all the plans that you have presented for us and the opportunities that are there. But there's two questions which are kind of linked together. And one of those says, how can community stakeholders assist to save and rebuild the Phoenix Center? And the second one, which is kind of a link to that, is how will the city engage the community? And that's important to me because this is a city that is owned by the taxpayers and the citizens and the people who visit the city. And so we serve them and we want to serve their best interest. So it's important for me to have stakeholder involvement in this. We've done it in many ways, from the master plan with stakeholders, to the economic recovery plan, the CNU, to the master plan for the parks, to all the things where we've brought people together to be collaborative in how we solve that. I think this is the time to kind of rebuild that here on this particular topic. There's a number of you who've said, I want to be involved in helping to resolve this and get this all the way to the conclusion of the settlement agreement. This is too important for the city of Pontiac, and I want to be there. I want to be involved. And so I have formed an advisory steering committee of people who understand that this is such a critical issue for the city, and they see many ways to be involved. This is going to be formed of your elected officials, some of whom are already accepted, city leaders, downtown leaders, grassroots leaders. So we want to be able to bring people to the table, bring the city council to the table. Everybody's involved in this, and make sure that we have to work in harmony to bring this thing to conclusion for the success, not only of the city, but for the success of the taxpayers and the residents in the city. We want to look at the end vision of what this can be when we bring this Phoenix Center back to life, and all the things it can do to stabilize the growing of our downtown. That's the vision we have, and that's the vision I would like to leave you with. Now, the announcements, once again, for those of you who want to make public comment, city council meeting, public comment at pontiac.mi.us. In addition to the fact that there are a lot of other city matters going on, we hope you are well. We will continue to give you information about the many things related to the COVID crisis and the governor's orders about that. We are in the city making sure that we're continuing those services. As I said, we're also getting prepared at some point to go back to city functioning, and to that sense, these city buildings have been deep cleaned, and we are also making sure that we have testing done. That is so important in this COVID crisis. If you understood, we had the first Pontiac test site established about 3 weeks ago. That's going great. And also the city, in terms of being in the cutting edge of the contact tracing, we have been contacted to be the launch site here in Oakland County for contact tracing that many of you have heard about. So we are looking to the future as we're now coming out of this COVID emergency. Once again, the next town hall will be on May 5th at 10 a.m. That is the time that's announced for the medical marijuana town hall. We're going to announce how that process is moving forward. And with that, I want to thank all of you who have been here, all of you who want to be part of this. For those of you who want to be a greater part of it, we'd also like to, it's time to form a committee now to talk about what happens once we get the amphitheater back in operation. For those of you who want to talk about the kinds of events, entertainment, let's start planning. Let's think about what the end goal is. Let's think of how we're working together as Pontiac citizens. This is a great city. We invite all those people who've come to invest, who believe in the growth of the city, and I thank all of those who committed to their efforts, their time, their volunteer efforts to make sure we get through this little difficult time right now for better days. And with that, we're going to roll out with the video. Thank you all for coming, and I welcome your input as we move forward successfully together in the city of Pontiac. Thank you.